at the end of the day, it's like realizing we all just want to be happy, right? It's like, what are we all going for? We're all going for this feeling of, I want to feel happier. I want to feel more satisfied, more fulfilled. Whether that comes from my work or my relationships or whatever it is, my bank account, we're looking for that happiness. And so it all starts with, the mind. Because everything, your whole world is experienced through your mind.
I'm Taryn, the Remote Yogi, and today I'm joined with Jeremy Lipkowitz, who is a mindfulness meditation coach who specializes in really working with men and some of their issues, whether it's pleasure, addiction, or other things I'm excited to dive into. But he also has a background in science, which I find really fascinating, and it gives a different perspective to the whole woo culture of mindfulness and meditation. So I'm excited to dive in with him today. I also asked Connor to join me because I thought he could give a different perspective than what I can do, as I really want to make sure that I'm including the men's side of the conversation because we do so much women's work on the blog. So Jeremy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
So I'm excited to kind of dive into your story because it sounds really similar to mine as far as the anxiety kind of taking over and having to sort it out. And mindfulness just ended up being the thing that worked for you, whereas I started with yoga and then moved into mindfulness.
Right, yeah.
So I'd love to have you walk us through that journey. You were in school studying science and tell us more about diving in.
Yeah, so I kind of had a very stereotypical college career of studying science and being very good academically. And my whole life was great. I was killing it in school. I had, top grades in a large school of 30,000. I had a lot of friends. I had a very active social life and sport life. I was president of a sports club and all these things. So my whole life on the outside was going great. But what nobody really knew is that on the inside, I was really suffering. So I was struggling with things like depression and anxiety, but I really kept it inside. So I kind of put this nice outward performance of like, oh no, everything's great, I love it. But inside I was struggling. And it dealt with a lot of things like anxiety and perfectionism. And that caused some kind of addictive behaviors. So things like drinking a lot of alcohol, going out and partying a lot, and then also sex. So I was totally addicted to sex and pornography. But there were these kind of shameful, dirty secrets that I didn't tell anybody about. And that went on for a few years. And at one point, I just kind of hit this breaking point where I kind of hit rock bottom. And I realized, like, how is it possible that I have all the pleasures in the world, I have everything I've ever wanted. Academically, I'm succeeding, like all my professors love me. How is it that I have all of this, but I'm still not happy? And I realized that there was something wrong. There was something that I was missing in life. And that caused me to start searching for solutions and for answers.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you mind walking us through a little bit more what that rock bottom looked like for you?
Yeah.
I think that's really relatable. Yeah.
There's actually this one moment that really stands out for me in my life. And I was at UC Davis at the time, so University of California, Davis. And again, I talked about my porn addiction. And so I was really kind of consumed with lust a lot of the time. I didn't show it a lot. I was very good at kind of hiding it, but I was like constantly just checking out women and looking around and always thinking about sex. Like they say guys think about sex every 3 seconds, and I don't think that's an exaggeration. I think it's really true. And I remember this one moment of walking down the street, and there was this girl in front of me, and I like couldn't help but stare at her booty. And I was just filled with so much lust. Like I felt this big, dark pit of emptiness in my stomach. And I remember having the thought, like, I can't go on living like this. I don't want this to be the rest of my life. Because when you're feeling that lust, and whether it's for, sexual attraction or lust for any sort of material thing, like wanting a new watch or wanting a new car or wanting like success. When you're filled with that desire, that craving, what it is basically your mind saying you can't be happy until you have that thing. And I realized that my whole life was like, it was just that thought, until you get this thing, you can't be happy. And I realized I don't want my life to be like this. Like, I can't keep living this way. And that caused me to have this kind of existential crisis where I started thinking about what is happiness? Like, what does it mean to actually be satisfied and fulfilled? And that caused me to start looking into meditation.
How was it negatively affecting you, or like looking back, how was it negatively affecting you? Because people might be going through the same things and not even realize that they've got a problem. So was the thinking about it all the time, noticeably affecting your life in certain ways?
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up because, I've been looking at pornography since I was maybe 8 or 9, or even, around then. Like, most guys started looking at it pretty young. And for about a decade, I didn't realize that it was having negative effects because it's so normalized. We kind of think, oh, everybody watches it. It's normal. It's not a big deal. And so I didn't realize it was actually having these negative consequences. I only realized later after really diving into the neuroscience behind it and what it actually does to your brain. But a lot of things like lack of focus, so complete inability to focus. My concentration was just nowhere. I would just be like looking around all the time. Insecurity, things like low self-esteem, so comparing myself to other people. Perfectionism, especially when it comes to my partners. I remember that I would have these beautiful romantic relationships, but I would always find like the smallest thing, like, their teeth, like their teeth is wrong or their breath smells bad. And I was developing this perfectionism, not only for myself, but for everyone else. So it was having consequences on my relationships and also just on my own sense of self-worth. And not only that, but as I mentioned, the kind of, when you're feeling that craving, it's impossible to feel genuinely fulfilled. Like, when you're filled with that sense of desire, oh, I need this thing, it's a state of suffering. And so that alone, even if it weren't for all the other things, just being filled with lust all the time itself was kind of one of the worst things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you've mentioned perfectionism a few times, and like, that's part of my story too, is just like the intense perfectionism. I'm curious, have you been able to really pinpoint what caused that perfectionism, the anxiety to like do everything right, be the best?
I think it's something, especially our generation, kind of the younger generation, deals with a lot, especially because of social media. We're constantly comparing ourselves to other people and, looking at the best version of everyone's life, sitting on Instagram or beautiful selfies and world travel. And so as a society, we're just kind of addicted to comparing our life to other people's, and we don't feel like we measure up. We don't feel good enough. And we're addicted to people approving of us. So that's, for me, I was really constantly seeking validation from outside myself because I didn't feel like I was good enough from within. And so I was constantly seeking this approval from other people, whether it was from my relationships or my professors or anywhere else. And what happens is we get addicted to that cycle. So it starts out as just a little bit like you get an A on the test and you're like, ooh, that feels good. And then, you get a like on your Facebook post and you're like, oh, that feels good. And what's happening is you're getting addicted in the same way we get addicted to drugs.
Right, like dopamine hits,
exactly,
right?
Yeah. Dopamine, epinephrine, like there's all these kind of neurotransmitters that get, triggered, and we get addicted to the good feelings. Yeah.
It's almost worse than like, you're very rarely comparing your life to someone particular else's life. You're looking at this person and going, oh, they're such a great entrepreneur. I want to have their success. I want to have their fitness ability. This other person's fitness ability.
Right.
I want to have this other person's happiness. And you're like, well, each of these take incredible, you know, the best of the best, the
Yeah.
folks at the top of social media or the news have sacrificed normally everything else in their life except for this one factor. And so to even want to combine those together is crazy in itself. You don't
Right.
really even think about that.
Yeah.
You're just feeling, oh, someone is better than me at these 5-6 different areas I want to be good at, therefore I'm not good enough. Or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Awful.
And we just become so addicted to pleasure in all of its different forms, whether it's like sense pleasure of food or sex, or the pleasure of, like doing well at something, addicted to the pleasure of fame or gain or success. For me, a big thing was academic success. And I was addicted to being the perfect student. Shows up for all of us in all different ways. And so learning that you can't actually control that, and learning how to be okay with people not liking you, like you can't please everyone. That's one of the biggest things I've learned, is like how to just be authentically myself and trust in my own goodness, rather than always trying to convince people like, oh, like me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that you brought up the word authenticity too. That's one of my big trigger words. Can you define that for me? What your definition of authenticity is, and like how you kind of work with your clients to get there?
Yeah. For me, it's a lot about, realizing that you're whole just as you are, and kind of stepping into a place where you're embodying that, as opposed to a conceptual understanding of it where you think, okay, like, I know I've done a good job. It's where you actually feel worthy within yourself, and you can embody it where, you're not just trying to please everyone, but you're going from a heart-centered place where you're driving the ship, as opposed to like asking everybody like, where should I go? You're just saying, oh, this is where I want to go, and I know that's where I want to go.
Yeah. It takes time to get there too. Like I think that's the other thing, people want to like, when they start getting on this journey, they want to rush into it, and those are lessons that like
And
slow build up.
for me, one of the best things I learned from all of this is that all of these things like authenticity and self-confidence and self-love and compassion, and all of these things are skills that you cultivate. They're not things that you read in a book and you're like, okay, now I've got it. They're like mental muscles, that you train over time. And so at first, they're going to be really weak. But that's what meditation is about. It's like you're strengthening these skills, strengthening your ability to be authentic, your ability to kind of be compassionate, to be self-compassionate. And a lot of people, you're right, they just kind of jump in and like, oh, I've meditated for an hour, why isn't it working?
Yeah.
This is one of the things I see all the time. People are like, yeah, I tried meditating and it didn't work for me. And I'm like, well, how long did you meditate? And they're like, maybe an hour. And it just doesn't work that way. It's like going to a single language class and being like, yeah, I took one class in Spanish and I haven't learned it yet.
Didn't work for me.
Right.
I mean, it's almost, the muscle comparison is more clear, right? Because you can just say, oh, how many times have you been to the gym once and ended up putting on, 20 pounds? So it's not,
Exactly.
It doesn't happen like that.
Right.
Yeah, and it's also one of those things that like, you can be in the best shape of your life and then ignore the gym for 2 years and you're back where you started. And that's the other thing, like I talk about self-love being a practice. It's like, it's something that you have to commit to every day. It's not like you said that you don't just get it one day and it's like done.
Right. Yeah, you don't get to a place where like, okay, you're good and you don't have to meditate anymore. It's a constant practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about mindfulness. You said like you started to find mindfulness. Walk us through like that journey into it and how you define mindfulness.
Yeah. So first I'll talk about kind of my own journey, because I know this is something that resonates with you guys, but really was a big part of my own journey. Is I hated woo-woo kind of like fluffy spirituality stuff, especially with my background in science. I used to be kind of a hardcore atheist, very like argumentative.
Yeah.
That like, oh, you think evolution's not real? I'll tell you about it. And whenever I heard people talking about things that I thought were like really fluffy or woo-woo, it just completely turned me off. And for the longest time, I thought that Buddhism and meditation were in that same realm. I thought it was just kind of like more spiritual stuff. I thought Buddhism, you had to like pray to the Buddha and you had to believe in reincarnation and all this stuff. So I started looking into happiness, and that got me into positive psychology. And positive psychology is kind of the study of human flourishing. Like, what does it take to actually be happy and fulfilled? And that got me into a book on the science of meditation, the science of mindfulness. And I started to realize that at its core, mindfulness and meditation is really just a pragmatic way of understanding your mind, like understanding your interior world and the dynamics of the mind. And that changed everything for me, because I realized I didn't have to start believing in reincarnation. I didn't have to bow down to any deity. It was a very rational approach, which I really loved. And that's what I try to do as a teacher, is help people understand that you don't have to balance your chakras. You don't have to like buy any crystals or anything like that. If you're into crystals, it's great, but like you don't have to get into that stuff. You know, you can just be a normal person and understand your mind. So that was life changing for me, and I know it kind of resonates with you guys. Like, you know, you don't have to get into that stuff.
Yeah, or if you do, great, and that works for
Exactly.
you. And
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing I talk to my clients about. Like they're like, do crystals work? Do oracle cards work?
Right.
They work if you believe they work. If not, they don't. And it's about the placebo effect as well, which you understand, like the brain. And it's like, yeah, if I believe this prayer is going to help me, then it probably will.
Yeah.
Versus, you know, if you don't want to believe in it, great, you're not missing out on anything.
Yeah.
You know?
Totally.
Sometimes they're just, I mean, you've got placebo effect, and you've also got good prompts. I mean, the cards are more specific, but if you've got, I've got this crystal for gratitude, you know, every day having it and going, gratitude, so
Right.
there are lots of legitimate reasons why they can be useful, but yeah, I think the biggest thing is delineating how tangled, you know, these things are, that you don't need to do, you know, if you're meditating, Buddhism doesn't also have to be wrapped up in there. They are separate things that happen to evolve together in that way, but that doesn't mean that they have to be together in that way.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And also, I like that you talked about it's more about understanding the brain mechanisms, because I think we've gotten into this like false belief that meditation is about emptying the mind completely.
Yeah.
And like maybe if you're a monk for 20 years, you might get there, but like the average person isn't gonna usually get to that level. So it's less about trying to get all the thoughts out of your mind and more about just like witnessing what comes up and how they come up and the patterns that are happening.
Yeah.
So like walk us through a little bit of what it means for you to meditate, what mindfulness is to you.
Yeah. And I love that you brought this up, because it's, you know, I've been teaching meditation now for about 7 years, and it's the number one thing that I see when people say like, I just can't meditate. And I say, oh, well, what's it like? And they say, well, I just have too many thoughts. I can't stop them. And you're completely right. It's not even like that's another level that most people don't get to. It's not even the point of meditation. It's like, we're not trying to empty the mind. The point is not to empty the mind. It's to have a better relationship with the mind. And to, you know, we talk about mindfulness. The ultimate goal of mindfulness is wisdom. And that's about having a better understanding. And so I really love that you brought this up, that like, stop trying to stop your thoughts, but instead just notice the kinds of thoughts you're having and learn how to be more compassionate towards yourself. You know, one of my favorite teachers, his name is Vinny Ferraro, he says, mindfulness has two components, kindness and awareness. And he says, if you have to let one of them go, let it be awareness. Like, just focus on kindness. And it's so great because he says, like, I know a lot of jerks that can meditate really good. And it doesn't really matter. Like, there are a lot of assholes that can be concentrated. And that's not what we're going for. We're going for how to have a better relationship. So how to be kind to yourself. You know, like when you fuck up, what do? I hope I can swear on this. Like,
Yes.
when you fuck up, like, do you treat yourself negatively, or are you gentle with yourself and saying, oh, I fucked up. Everybody fucks up. That's okay. You know? So that's what we're cultivating with mindfulness. And that's what I try to help people understand.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to my language. I just say trying to become the non-judgmental witness of your thoughts, right? Like just being able to sit back and watch everything that's happening and not become attached or judgmental about them. I think it's Thich Nhat Hanh, has like a really great quote about, maybe it's him. Meditation's like, it's like your mind's your house. You've got the front door open, the back door open. Just don't invite the thoughts for tea. right? It's just about like letting them pass through and not like
Mhm.
attaching and holding onto them
Yeah.
and wanting to like dig in.
Well, and I think another way of reframing that is to invite them in for tea, but to not, because normally what we do is we see the bad thoughts and we try to keep them out. And we see the good thoughts and we're like, you need to stay forever. Like, don't go away, don't go away. And so instead it's like inviting the bad ones in for tea and don't hold the good ones hostage. But instead, yeah, be like, oh, come on in. Like, oh, anger. Oh, come on in. Lust. Come on in. Like my old friend, Lust. Join me for tea. And when you're ready to go, you can go. My old friend, self-criticism. Come on in. But normally we're trying to like keep them out, We see
Right. Both doors shut.
Exactly. Yeah, we're like, don't get in, and you need to stay forever. So it's more about like just having this easy relationship with them.
I found one of the interesting to see when you're like aha moment was that I found that it's that you are not your thoughts, and there's almost like a phase change to be sciencey. Is that I feel like I went through most of my life until I was, I don't know, let's say 18, 19, 20 or something, just being my thoughts. And then when you get into meditation or some sort of reflections, you realize that there is at least two kind of separate entities, right? There is almost your subconscious perhaps, and then there is your conscious thoughts going past. And then as soon as you realize that when that you are wrapped up in thoughts, that isn't actually what your mind is. And when you realize that you can almost step back and just look at the thoughts and kind of notice them, where you're like, shit, this is a completely different kind of state of mind, and it's not, it isn't anything super transcendent or amazing, but like it's so subtly different.
Yeah.
And that was one of the big points for me, where I was like, oh shit, have I literally gone through the last 20 years of my life just being wrapped up in this and never noticing that there is a difference between the two.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what did you have like that when you started meditating, or when whatever got you into it? You were like, oh, this is something different happening.
I think one of the biggest things that's coming up for me when you say that is, what was really powerful for me is understanding that you actually have a choice in how to proceed. Like most of the time, we're all just kind of running on autopilot. We're acting out our habits and tendencies, and we're not conscious and choosing how do I want to live. We see, like for me, it was seeing an attractive girl and just being like, I need it, going after it. Or some delicious food and just being like, oh, okay, I need it. And a lot of times we're just doing that because it's how we evolved, it's, our habits. And what mindfulness does is it gives you that space to actually choose how to respond. So one of my favorite quotes comes from Viktor Frankl. Do you guys know Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor? So he was in the Holocaust, in a concentration camp, and a psychologist, so he really understood kind of human psychology. And he has this beautiful quote. It says, in between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is your power to choose your response. And in your response applies your growth and your freedom. So it's this idea that like, we might have this stimulus, and normally our response is right after. And that's when we're reacting. Just like somebody says something mean and we slap them. There's no space there. But with mindfulness, you're creating that space where something happens and you can say, oh, how do I want to respond to this? And so you're not just kind of pulled around by your thoughts. So for me, I was pulled around by my lust all the time. I had no control over my actions. And meditation gave me more that ability to have more of my power back, like choosing what do I want to do and realizing that you're not your thoughts, like you say. They're just things that are happening.
There's also a why to it, right? Where you go, how do I want to respond?
Mm-hmm.
And then a little deeper than that, you can go, why do I feel like I want to respond? Why did I feel like I wanted to respond this one way?
Yeah.
Why do I feel like I want to respond this new way?
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, and that's where kind of the envisioning, it can be really powerful, is deciding what kind of person do I want to be. For me, that was powerful in that moment when I was walking down the street and I saw this girl and I was just filled with lust. And I realized, I thought this out, I was like, I don't want to be some 70-year-old pervert who's just trying to like hook up with 18-year-old girls. I don't want that for my future. And thinking about what kind of man do I want to be. And this is where I get into kind of the men's stuff that I do. It's like, who do I want to be as a man in this world? And what are the qualities that I want to cultivate? And so that was really powerful for me. Yeah.
Funny you've had that thought and now found yourself in Thailand with lots of older dudes interested in
Yeah.
20-year-old
Yeah.
And I'm excited to dive into the men's work. I just want to circle back a little bit to the different parts of your mind, because you talked about anxiety and depression and things like that. And I find working with my clients and my students, they start to feel like they're defined by like their mental illness or whatever. I don't even call it that anymore. Like, I don't like that term. But like, if you have anxiety, you're defined by your anxiety. And again, when you can start to separate yourself, like I actually tell my friends and clients, like, name that part of your brain like something different. Like, you know, mine's my like anxious diva, and I like literally talk about her like she's a separate entity. It's like she's the obnoxious roommate who has something to say about everything, and that it's not useful. But it also allows me to just separate myself and have an internal dialogue where I'm like, okay, thanks for trying to be helpful right now. You're not being helpful. So like, you know, and it lets me like separate myself from that chaos.
What I love that strategy of like, you kind of give it a persona and a name. And the one thing that I would really add that I found helpful and a lot of my clients find helpful is to really make sure that we're treating those parts of ourselves with compassion. And what I like to do is I see that, you know, I do the same thing. For me, I kind of visualize these parts of myself as little hamsters. They're like, you know, like when I have the really lust-filled hamster, he's like, oh my God, I want it. And there's like a horny little hamster inside my chest. And I'm like, oh, you poor thing. Like, it's okay.
It's like, I love the hamster.
Yeah, because the thing is, like, those parts of ourselves, they're suffering, you know? And what they need is compassion. You know, there are times where it's good to be like, you're not being helpful, get out, you know, and to shut it up. But I think more often what we need is to turn towards it and be like, hey, man, I know you're suffering. And to give it like, you know, a gentle, like a hug or turn towards it and embrace it. To realize that it's not going to take control of you, but to realize that what really heals it over time is compassion and saying, hey, I care for you. I know you're struggling. And then you can kind of dive deeper and see like, you know, why are you this way? And what can I do to help?
Right. Like what part of your story created that broken part of you?
Exactly.
And like kind of go back and usually it's from childhood and younger years. And so it's being gentle because like that part of you that's broken is still stuck at that age or whatever. It's just like really being kind. Like I talk to myself like a kid a lot of the time. Like,
Well, because a lot of these issues come from trauma in the past. You know, a lot of people have trauma that they're just not aware of. And so when you start to realize like, oh, this is deep and this comes from early on, a lot of it is from when we're kids. And to start to dive into that, like, I know you're suffering and I know there's a reason behind this.
And that the trauma can be something really small, because people often think of trauma as like sexual abuse or like something like major, but it could be something as simple as like somebody called you a name and it just stuck with you your whole life, you know?
Yeah, it can be very small, something that, you know, because like I don't have any major, like I was never sexually abused or anything like that, but we all have those little things that scar us emotionally and we hold on to them.
So working with men specifically, are there like a lot of traumas that you see as like a normality for men in the work that you do? So I see a lot of patterns with women.
Yeah. I mean, the patterns in terms of there are a lot of men who were traumatized. I mean, we hear a lot about sexual assault with women, but there's a lot of sexual assault with men, you know, especially when they're young as children. But it's not always so, you know, obvious as that. There's a wide range of things that might happen. So a lot of the work I do, it's less about kind of diving into what happened in your past and more about how do we work with what's coming up now. So how do we move forward, not to deny the past and not to avoid it. But a lot of times, you know, therapy is great, but a lot of times therapy is just kind of like going back and digging in the past, and you're digging up old stuff that you're not necessarily ready to process. And so what I do with a lot of guys, it's more about learning how do we cultivate more of that self-confidence, that self-love, feeling of worthiness, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of it is also just behavior change. You know, like it might not even be so so much related to the trauma, and it's just like it's become its own beast. It's just like it's a habit that has taken on a life of its own. And so a lot of it is just what are some strategies around changing the behavior.
Are there any, I guess, common habits or patterns that you find men in? There's, I guess, certain ways they're self-sabotaging.
Yeah.
Well, I like that word, self-sabotage.
Yeah. I mean, well, so it's kind of obvious. One is porn. I mean, porn it's such a common thing that so many guys do. And I want to make it clear that, I'm not against porn. I don't think porn is inherently evil. Same with masturbation or any of this stuff. It's more about understanding your own relationship to it. And for a lot of guys, we have an unhealthy relationship to it. So there are some people out there that have a truly healthy relationship. Like, it doesn't control them. They might use it once in a while. It might be a benefit to their relationship. But for the majority of guys, it has reached an unhealthy level. And the scary thing is that I would say the majority of those people don't understand that it's unhealthy, that they think it's just normal, or that, it's because of something else. So starting to look at your relationship to porn and how it's affecting your own world, how it's affecting your relationships, your feelings of self-confidence, and all these things. Porn is one of the biggest ones. And then beyond that, there's also just how we relate to dating, dating apps, and all these things, like just pleasure in general, that kind of pleasure seeking. We live in a world there's so much pleasure. We can walk downstairs and get candy and cookies, and we can go for a massage and get a smoothie, but we, for the most part, feel a lack of meaning and fulfillment. And so that's one of the biggest things I see with guys, is that we have a lot of pleasure and a lot of authority to do what we want, but there's no sense of meaning, no sense of fulfillment.
I'm curious, about the relationships, how that affects the dating. So it's like they're going in it just for the pleasure seeking, so they never get that meaningful connection.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure most of the women kind of listening to this can relate to that. It's like a guy will be super interested and very charming, and then they have sex, and it's like you never hear from them again. And so for a lot of guys, it's just, and I say this from personal experience. I'm not pointing a finger at anyone saying I'm above it all. To this day, I still see the remnants of this psychology. It's like you're just so consumed with wanting that pleasure that's what you're going in for, and you fail to see the whole woman. You fail to see the emotional world, the story. You're not even interested in kind of understanding her on that level. You're just like, I want to hit that,
Right.
So it completely affects how you go in, and then once you get it, you're like, oh, okay, I've had that. And here's where modern day pornography really has a bad effect, is because porn these days, there's so much availability that what you're doing when you're a guy is you're looking at, in a given night, you could be seeing 1,000 different women. And you've got 10 tabs open. All the guys listening to this understand what I'm talking about.
I've been there as a woman, so
right.
Yeah.
And women look at porn too, and it's like you've got 10 tabs open, and you're trying to find the perfect one and trying to find the perfect thing to finish on, and you're always seeking novelty. And what you're getting addicted to is novelty. You're saying, I want something new. And as soon as you finish to it, then you're like, that doesn't do it for me anymore. And you find a new one. And each night you might be going on seeing 1,000 new women. And what happens is each time you see a new image, you're getting that dopamine spike. And so this is why it's worse than some of the hard drugs or food, is that some of the hard drugs, you get one spike of a really intense thing. With pornography, it's you're spiking it every 3 seconds for maybe 2 hours. It's spike, spike, spike. And so you're becoming completely consumed by it and addicted to that rush of adrenaline. Adrenaline, norepinephrine, all the dopamine, all these things. Yeah.
There's something that's coming up for me just as you're speaking about porn and relationships and everything, is that I find that men tend to be more focused on the end result.
Yeah.
Right? they're more focused sexually usually on finishing.
Uh-huh.
That's their goal. That's what they're there to do. As soon as that's done, they're like, "Eh."
Yeah.
Whereas women are kind of focused on like the whole process.
Uh-huh.
So like whether in relationships or in sex, like it'd be great to finish, but that's not our goal. Our goal is to like enjoy the whole journey, and so that can be a big conflict within relationships and sexually. I hear a lot of women struggle with that with men, just like wanting to finish and get to the end.
There's so much. I mean, we could talk for hours about the images because it's not just. I think it's slightly an oversimplification to say guys just want to finish,
right?
Because it's more complicated than that. Like a lot of times, what guys want to do is not necessarily finish, but they want to reenact what they're seeing in porn. They're like, I want to look like that. I want to be in this position. And a lot of times, there's also there's the comparison. Like I need to perform in bed like a porn star performs, not realizing that porn stars are like hopped up on Viagra and all sorts of crazy stuff that's going on there. And so there's so many things going on with the dynamics. And also porn is entirely created by men for men's pleasure. And so in terms of what genuine intimacy is about, like what turns on a woman, most guys' education comes from porn. And that doesn't actually work in the bed in terms of what it takes to please a woman. And so there's just like a miseducation going on where guys have no clue what to do in bed. They don't know how to actually please a woman. And it's all focused on like, how do I look? Do I look like a porn star? Am I performing like a porn star? So there's just so many ways that pornography kind of screws with your sexual relationships, like on a whole host of levels. We could really talk for hours.
Yeah, and the same with women too. I mean, our comparison. I mean, women are getting plastic surgery to look to fix their labia. Like it's insane to me.
Yeah. Well, it might be good. I think diving into more of the details on pornography and on dating at the moment might be good, because it seems like there are just so many reasons why. I mean, it's almost like being caught up in your thoughts analogy. If you watch porn and realize that very little of it is reflective of actual sex and relations, then like that can be fine. But if you're really expecting it to be reflective of what is normal, that isn't good, because one, I mean, it's set up for you to feel inferior and insecure about yourself, because one, porn stars are hired to be in shape and have giant dicks. Mm-hmm. Two, if you think about it like almost like Instagram, people are posting the best sides of themselves on Instagram. If you are doing amateur porn, right, if you're uploading your own stuff, the bigger your dick is, for example, the more likely you would be to upload porn of yourself, because you'd feel better about yourself to do that. So then everyone's like, wow, like is it normal to have a foot-long dick? Should my dick be a foot long? Oh god, what's wrong with that? And then like you said, the male-driven nature of it, leading people for guys to feel a bit inferior. Yeah. For women to just be, I guess, unsatisfied by the whole thing, creating some whole different awful cycles. So I don't know, it'd be interesting to get into more of the details of how porn, the specifics of how porn fucks people up, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of mentioned a big one, which is just that feeling of insecurity, of feeling unworthy in our own bodies. Like, one of my I didn't mention this, but my own kind of origin story around meditation was also body image insecurity. When I was in 6th grade, I got teased for being fat. Like, I wasn't even that fat, I was just kind of chubby. And that's one of my traumas, is like kids would pick on me and tease me. And it stayed with me, where I still feel kind of like, I've come a long way, and now I feel very confident in myself, but I can still see the remnants of that. And porn does that to a large degree. I mean, you're comparing yourself with these porn stars. I think, though, one of the main things I see with a lot of clients that I work with is just kind of the time and energy that it takes away from your life. Like, a lot of these guys that I work with, are watching porn 4 or 5 hours a day. Sometimes maybe not that intense. Maybe it's 1 or 2 hours a day. Masturbating maybe 5 or 6 times a day. And it just kind of, it derails your life, because it pulls you away from any sort of genuine sense of fulfillment. Guys don't know what it means to be of service anymore, because they're just kind of looking for, okay, I need to go masturbate. So for me, I mean, there's all this stuff with like body image and comparison. One of the biggest things I see is just getting sucked into the pleasure cycle of not knowing how to process your emotions, how to deal with difficult things. Like porn also becomes another way to avoid dealing with things. It's like, I can't deal with this emotion I'm feeling, so I'm just gonna go watch porn. Yeah. And you get lost in it for hours and you get sucked into this cycle. So there's so many ways that, if you're watching this, if you're still watching porn, like take a look at it and like see what it's doing to your life, a lot of times we're just unaware. And the biggest thing, a friend and I started a group to help people with this. And one of the biggest things we've seen is that having a group where you can be open and vulnerable about these things is one of the most important things you can do. To actually start to open up about it and say like, hey, I'm struggling with this, I need help. That's one of the biggest things you can do. And I remember for me, that time when I realized I had an issue with it, like I was struggling with addiction to porn, it took me a solid 6 years before I could tell anyone that I even watched porn. I couldn't tell my closest friends, my family members, counselors, therapists. I was so ashamed by it, even though it was normalized, even though I knew like everybody watched porn. I was so ashamed that I couldn't tell anyone that I watched porn, let alone had an addiction. And it was when I started to open up about it that this huge weight got lifted. Like just telling a friend and be like, hey, I struggle with porn. And it was just like, and for the guys in our group that we help, we see this so much that what they love is just having that space to be like, a lot of what we do is brotherhood and just having a space for brothers to come together and connect with other people who are dealing with the same stuff. Yeah.
I always say that it's like you don't know how much your weight is on your shoulders until you take it off. So you can be crushed under, that shame. And then it's only when you get rid of it when you're like, whoa, was I carrying that around for years? And could I have got rid of that years ago by just saying this? It's like, well, I should talk about things more often, just in case you've got a load of extra baggage just kind of crushing you.
Yeah, and this is why it's so unfortunate is that most guys have grown up watching porn. It's like it's like asking a fish, how's the water? To ask a guy like, how's porn affecting your life?
Yeah.
We just don't know because your whole life you've been seduced by it. And so it's only once you actually break free, like the guys in our group would do a 30-day challenge every once in a while, where they have 30 days, no porn, no masturbation. And to see the kind of the changes in their lives, like for the first time since they were maybe 9 years old, to go that long without watching porn, and they're like, I have more energy, more strength, more confidence, more focus.
Time.
More time. Yeah, it's incredible what it does. Yeah.
There's also understanding that it like the news, it's a media industry where their profit is off getting you on that side for as long as possible. So it is they're scientifically, trying to get the best stuff, and they're trying to find the best stuff out of all this stuff uploaded to get to you, to keep you on this site for as long as they possibly can, and to keep you returning, as much as possible. So there is a lot of money in making this, as in making this the best cocaine that you could possibly have.
Right.
Exactly.
And I think that's so important to talk about because, again, I have mostly women on my site, so I know it's mostly women who are going to be watching this. I hope they do. And we, as women, have had this idea for a long time. I think it's shifting of what's wrong with men for watching porn? It's we don't have compassion for it. It's been this thing oh, that's gross. Why are you porn addicted? That's shameful. We actually give you that shame by our attitude by it. It broke up my parents' marriage. Porn. And so I'm curious for the women watching how we can be better allies to you guys, because we're always asking men to be better allies to us.
Yeah.
But you guys are still struggling and have these insecurities, and we need to start seeing that porn is an insecurity issue, that we need to be more supportive. So how can we be better allies for men going through this?
That's a great question. And I've never even thought of that. I do think that what would help men the most is connecting with other brothers, connecting with other guys and realizing that they're not alone, because one of the biggest things is that feeling of isolation and feeling like they're alone. I think from the women's side, just being understanding that it's a powerful thing that a lot of guys, are kind of don't have control over, and they've been sucked into it not because they're a bad person, but just because it's the industry. It was created to suck people in and kind of keep you there. So to just be understanding and say like, hey, I know you're struggling with this. Do you want to talk about it? Like, to have patience with them,
Right.
especially if you're in a relationship. And again, sometimes porn can be helpful for relationships. It's all about understanding how it's impacting your life.
Well, because I think the biggest thing for me is that women take it as a personal attack,
Yeah.
right? Like if my boyfriend's watching porn, it's because there's something wrong with me, or like
Right.
he has to see other women, and so they get defensive
Yeah.
before they can like stop and pause and think that like this has nothing to do with them.
Right.
This is all like a problem that their partner's going through.
Yeah.
I think that's important to like take yourself out of the picture.
100%. Yeah.
I don't know if you have any thoughts with like women and how we can better support men who are like going through any kind of insecurity issue, not really just porn related, but
I mean, it's probably that. It's just going. It's removing yourself from the self-absorption to think that it's all about you. It's probably very little about you. And I guess actually it might tie into dating well. So I figure that people normalize stuff, right? So you want some novelty, you get the novelty, and then after a while you normalize it down and you go something different, which is how you end up, I assume, watching tentacle horse porn orgies or something, right? But yeah, I assume it is that guys. It's sometimes hard to differentiate what you actually want and are attracted to or into, for example, and what you've been conditioned to think you want from, the media, porn, all of these different things. And sometimes you can't separate those two until you've had enough experience with enough different people to go, actually, no, I am into this. I'm into these kind of people. I'm into this kind of stuff in the bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're so insecure and wrapped up from all of this, from being fucked up from porn, you might never get those experiences or even reflect on those experiences. So I think women understanding it's not about them, but guys might be thinking, they might just be normalizing their girlfriend and thinking they want something different or other, because that's just what they've been trained on for a decade plus, decades.
Yeah. Well, and I think that kind of gets back to what we're talking about with the novelty and becoming addicted to novelty and learning that, that's what gets out of control when you become addicted to porn, is that seeking a novelty. And usually it does escalate where, at first you're like, you see, just some boobs and you're like, oh, that's great. And then, like the next month you're like, well, that doesn't do it for me anymore. So I got to get into something more. And then eventually you lead up to horse tentacles, whatever it is. It's a real thing. Yeah.
We've all been there.
Yeah. You know what we're talking about. And to understand, like, that's why for me, it's so powerful to recognize this, that if I want to be genuinely fulfilled, if I want contentment and happiness, it comes by training yourself with how to be grateful for what you have, how to be content with the way things are, as opposed to, and this related to, this is where it kind of all ties together, is I was constantly seeking something better, constantly seeking more, whether it was in my academic success, my sports life, my body. I eventually even became a personal trainer. I was, working out 6 days a week, and I looked fantastic, but there was always something wrong with me. I could always say, well, okay, now I've got a six pack, but I need it to be better. And it's the same with sex. It's like you're training your mind to say, okay, now that I've gotten that, I need something more. Whereas with mindfulness and meditation, what you're doing is training your brain to say, how can I learn the skill of being content and grateful for what I have? And it's a skill that you're training. It's not like it's not something you just get every time and this is how mindfulness works. Every time you sit down with the breath, and on a single in-breath, you just feel the rising of the belly, and you say, just this is enough. What you're doing is strengthening that contentment muscle. When your mind is distracted and you're thinking about stuff and you're saying, well, this is how it is, and that's okay, you're strengthening your contentment. So each time you pay attention to the breath with contentment, and equanimity. You're just saying, oh, this is how it is, and this is enough. I don't need a deeper breath. I don't need more concentration. I don't need to sit in full lotus. However I am right now is enough. And that's what we're training with meditation.
That's beautiful.
We're also like, we're in a world that's set up for the opposite of that, right? If you don't want more, then we can't sell you things. And
Exactly.
capitalism is all built on being able to constantly make people feel insecure to some degree, sometimes vastly insecure, sometimes a little insecure. So if you didn't feel that you weren't enough, then you wouldn't want to get your next thing to fill that hole, however big or small that might be. And so like one understanding that and going, okay, the entire world that I live in is designed for this.
Yeah.
Okay, give that some space and I'll try to be happy with what I've got.
And I love you brought that up because it's understanding that it's not our fault. It's the society we live in is completely built around making us feel like we're not good enough. You know, that's why one of the biggest things I see in the clients I work with is just that feeling of I'm not good enough. My body isn't good enough. My sex life isn't good enough. My bank account isn't big enough. Whatever it is, it's like we don't feel like we're good enough yet. And so that's one of the key things we're working with is just learning how to say, I am good enough. I mean, to me, that's what spirituality is all about.
Yeah.
It's just that recognition of like, I'm worthy, you know, I'm good enough just as I am.
Yeah, you're not too much, you're enough. Like those are the big things that I work with as well with women. Same thing. It's a human condition.
Yeah.
You know? Well, I want to make sure I get around to some of the science things before we wrap this up because I'm really fascinated in the fact that you come from a science background. So you studied genetics and system biology and like different things. I would love to learn how the science background has affected the work that you do in mindfulness.
Yeah. It's affected everything. I mean, for me, so I was in a PhD program studying genetics and genomics and eventually left my PhD to kind of commit full-time to teaching meditation. And for me, I don't see it as like changing my path at all. Like I see meditation as a science of the mind. And I've held on to my kind of rational, pragmatic, secular nature. And it's just shifting from how can we understand the universe and nature to how can we understand through science what's going on our inner world, on the interior. So for me, it informs everything I do. And I think it's why I connect so deeply with some of the people I work with is that there's so many people out there that just hate the woo-woo bullshit. And when I teach, I give like a no bullshit, approach to meditation. So I never talk about any of the kind of woo-woo stuff or reincarnation or cosmic energy or anything like that. And a lot of people really connect with that. And essentially what I'm trying to do is just be the person that I would have wanted to meet when I first started. Like how can I be someone to support people who are not into woo-woo stuff and are having trouble in a sea of woo-woo-ness.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
You also studied science, and you're getting really more into the mindfulness and those practices. So I'm curious, like, if you've got any like questions about like the science or like I know you know a lot, but for people at home who are like, what does science have to do with my meditation practice?
I think maybe just going into some of because I think what got me into it in the first place was saying that there is legitimate research, and now there's a lot of legitimate research backing up all of the good things you can do for this, and then also looking at sometimes comparing like what is the most common trait or routine thing that successful, fulfilled people have, and then when that came up and it's like meditation or mindfulness, I'm like, oh cool, well I guess I should try that then. So I guess the kind of science, the benefits, the strongest benefits that science is suggesting.
And for me, the way that science played into my own practice is just understanding that when you look at it from a neurological perspective, from a psychological perspective, it just makes sense. When you look at neuroplasticity, that's one of the things that really turns me on the most is this understanding that what you think and do and even what you pay attention to changes the structure and function of the brain. And one of my favorite quotes is neurons that fire together wire together. And it's like the more you use a certain neural pathway, the stronger it becomes. And when you realize that that's true, it's impossible to ignore the realm of meditation. Because essentially, when you don't pay attention, what you're doing is you're strengthening lust, you're strengthening insecurity, you're strengthening doubt, pessimism, all these things. And what we're doing with meditation is we're saying, okay, what are the qualities of the mind that lead to more happiness, that lead to self-confidence and fulfillment? And you're saying, okay, that's a good quality that leads to happiness. How can I strengthen it? And you do that by firing those neural pathways. So for example, contentment is one of the ones that leads to more happiness. And so in mindfulness, you're just saying, okay, how can I strengthen that quality? And it's just like, when you look at the neuroscience, you just can't argue it. It's like, of course you need to pay attention to what you're thinking and doing.
I mean, that's a lot of what I try to relate back to in science or in anxiety work. I'm not a sciencey person at all. Like, I'm learning to enjoy the mind stuff because that's fascinating to me. But I've always been like, I just struggled with science. But one of the things I really am like fascinated by is like even things like the breath, how the breath is having such an effect on the body, like the parasympathetic nervous system, how to engage that just by changing your breath pattern.
Right.
That's fascinating to me that we have so much control of things that we think are out of our control, right?
Yeah. And I think that's the body is so important, of understanding your body and the effect that your body has on your mind and your experience. A lot of times, so many people that I work with, their whole day, they're kind of tensed up in the shoulders and just kind of tight and really tense and nervous. And they don't realize that that is influencing their mind, and they're becoming even more nervous because their body is tensed up. And that if you just learn how to relax the shoulders, it actually has an effect on the mind. So there's so much interplay between the body and the mind. And when you start to really look into it, at the end of the day, it's like realizing we all just want to be happy, right? It's like, what are we all going for? We're all going for this feeling of, I want to feel happier. I want to feel more satisfied, more fulfilled. Whether that comes from my work or my relationships or whatever it is, my bank account, we're looking for that happiness. And so it all starts with, the mind. Because everything, your whole world is experienced through your mind. And what really nailed it home for me when I was first getting into this is, again, recognizing that you can go to LA and you can go to New York and you can see people with all the money in the world and all the material comfort, and they're miserable. And you can go to, the poorest slums of India and meet people that have literally nothing and see the biggest smiles and the most sense of contentment and fulfillment. And so when I reflected on that, I was like, okay, there's got to be something besides material comfort. There are other ways. And the fact that I was miserable when I had everything I wanted was a big sign to me, like, I've got to do something different.
I'm curious, with a lot of your research with happiness, do you feel that happiness as the goal is sustainable? Because I often think that, if we're aiming for happiness, we'll eventually, that'll be our baseline. And It's almost like a depression happens because, if you're just constantly dealing with zero struggle, zero challenge.
Totally. I'm so glad you brought this up because it's one of in the kind of spiritual self-help, mental health world, I think it's one of the biggest things that I see. And it's what I'm just really happy you brought this up. So I think we need to redefine the word happiness. And for me, when I say happiness, what I mean is a sense of inner fulfillment and that kind of genuine sense of life satisfaction. It's not what a lot of people think of as kind of this bubbly smiling all the time. It has not, well, joy is a different one, but it's not about pleasantness necessarily. Because joy can also be very subdued, kind of like joy. But it doesn't always appear bubbly or bright or smiling. But true inner fulfillment is like Mathieu Ricard, one of my favorite teachers, he talks about, if you're in the ocean and you might be at the surface of the ocean and there might be a storm, and if you're in a boat at the surface, you're kind of rocked away by the storm. But if you're in the depths of the ocean, everything is peaceful and still. So what we're going for in meditation is not the kind of like bubbly, everything's pleasant all the time, but it's more about equanimity or contentment, which is to say, even when things are unpleasant, even when I'm not getting what I want, can I still be at peace inside? So it's not this kind of like, you always need to be smiling, like, hey, everything's great. It's like knowing that you're at peace even when things are unpleasant. So even when you have pain in the body, even when you're angry or upset or depressed, this is what's hard for people to understand, is that you can be in a state of unpleasantness and still be fulfilled from the inside. And that's what I see is kind of what I see most wrong with the current kind of spiritual self-help world, is a lot of it is about how to feel blissful all the time. So this is not about just feeling blissful all the time. It's not about just being like bubbly and positivity, that kind of thing. It's about finding that sense of wisdom from within, where like understanding things might be pleasant or unpleasant, but you're at peace.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, because I consider myself more on the spiritual woo-woo side than you are, not to most people's levels, but I talk about like spiritual bypassing, which is what that is. It's like the idea of like, if I just affirm every day to be positive, like that's not helpful. I believe in challenges. I believe in going through struggle. I believe in like working with your anxiety instead of like shutting it out completely.
Exactly.
Like these things are helpful. Like we were like created to have struggle and challenge. Like you have to have a little bit, or you're always just gonna like numb out and feel nothing.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that we went there as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And that drives you nuts too.
Yeah, I'm into like marketing and psychology, so my brain is always just thinking about how the media is trying to fuck people up, and it's like a lot of the best things in life are found through struggle. You have to put yourself in, if you're growing, it feels uncomfortable to grow, so you have to put yourself in these kind of more difficult situations and get okay with that to feel more fulfilled, to get the best things in life, the things that most people like don't have. You need to be in struggling situations. We evolved to be in struggle for almost our entire existence. Life was really, really fucking hard. So like we're adapted for that. But then on the flip side, we live a limited lifespan, and so therefore there is money to be made from selling people the same results in less time. And so there is just the whole system is designed to try sell you, how can you get happier or fulfilled or whatever in less time? What is the hack to get you there quicker? And like sometimes that's the complete opposite of what you want to be doing. You want to be going, what's the hard way that's likely to get you there? How can I be okay with making the hard way?
Yeah.
More of, just being more okay with that being something that like I should do to just feel more, fulfilled or at peace with my life.
Yeah. One of my favorite teachings from the kind of Buddhist psychology is what's called the 8 worldly winds. And it's this idea that there are always these 8 different winds that are kind of blowing through our life. And they're winds that we can't stop. And so the 8, it's 4 pairs of things, but it's pleasure and pain, gain and loss, fame and disrepute, and praise and blame. And it's understanding that like we can't control when we have pleasure or pain. We can't control when we have praise or blame. That these are things that just come and go, and that true fulfillment or happiness is learning how to be okay no matter which way the wind is blowing. It's like you can go to a room of 100 people and give your message and say what you're all about, and 50 people might love you, and the other 50 might hate you for saying the exact same thing. And to understand you can't control those things. All you can control is your sense of inner peace and well-being.
Beautiful. Well, if people want to work with you or find you online, where are you at?
Yeah, so I've got, you can find me on Instagram, Jeremy Mindful. You can go to my website, jeremylipkowitz.com. If you're interested in the men's health and men's sexuality stuff, you can look up Controlled Mastery. That's our kind of Facebook presence. We've got a group, really good group going on. But I'm very easy to find online.
Perfect. And if you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube, All the links will be on the blog, so make sure to head over there and you can learn more about Jeremy. I've got one last question for you, and I was kind of like debating where I was going to go with this. Usually I have women on my podcast. You're the third man. This is exciting. And I always ask them, like, what's one lesson that they wish they could instill in all young girls? So I'd love to learn what you'd want to instill in all young boys. But I think I also, because I have so many female listeners, I would like to know what's one thing that you wish all women understood about men as well. So 2 questions for you to wrap up.
Yeah, I guess what I would like all women to understand about men is that you know, we're emotional creatures too, and a lot of men have been, because of the culture, kind of suppressed and taught to suppress things, and that there's a lot of struggle going on that men just don't know how to express. And so to learn how to be patient. And to give your man the space to kind of open up and to know that it's okay to cry. I mean, this is really more for men to understand, but for women to understand that it's not their fault that they're suppressing things. There's a lot of pressure for men to not show emotion, to not cry, to not be vulnerable. And so to understand it's a long journey for a lot of guys. And some guys, you know, take a lot more space to kind of open up. So that's what I hope most women would understand about men. And again, that thing that, like, if they're watching porn, it's not about you. You know, it's like, this is the thing that a lot of guys struggle with. You know, it's one of the most common addictions and one of the most common things people go to addiction centers to get recovery from is around sex addiction and porn addiction. What I hope all young girls realize is...
Young boys.
Well, I'm going to say what I hope all young girls... Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Okay, cool.
Because so I was raised by 3 women, basically. Like, my parents got divorced when I was 3, and I was raised by my mom and my 2 sisters. So I grew up in a female household.
I love that.
And so in a lot of my life, I've seen powerful women and women who kind of know how to stand up for what they want. And so to young women, I would say, be a badass, you know, like, be yourself. Don't take shit from men. I can say this from personal experience. There's a lot of shitty men out there, myself included. Like, I'm not going to pretend that I've got it all figured out and I'm like a holy person. There's a lot of guys out there, and, you know, don't take shit from guys. Like, if a guy's mistreating you, get out of the relationship. So that's what I would say to young girls.
Being a badass. You've been on my website. I like this.
Yeah.
Good tie-up.
That's right. I actually didn't even think about that. But yeah, totally be a badass. Yeah.
Good marketing.
Yeah. And to young boys, I mean, just understand the consequences of porn. You know, it's so easy to just think that it's normal, everybody does it, but it really builds up over time slowly. You don't see the effects of it right away, but the consequences of what it does to your own self-worth, to your security, to your sense of, you know, what it means to be masculine. This is a whole other topic of, like, what does it mean to be a man in this world? And there's some themes that I'm not saying, like, it's not a gendered thing, like, you know, biological male versus female. I'm saying, like, there's masculine energy in women and in men.
Yeah.
And what does it mean to have masculinity? And a lot of it is around, you know, being of service, being a protector, being a creator, you know, being a warrior in certain ways. And porn teaches us none of that. And to just kind of realize there's nothing evil about porn, there's nothing shameful about it, but it's a very powerful substance, and to be very mindful of how you're using it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. I love, like, getting into the men archetypes and the
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone so much for watching. Thank you, Jeremy and Connor, for joining me, giving me some extra men's perspectives. I'd love to hear from you guys. If you have any questions, I'd love for you to drop them down below. I can always reach out to Jeremy, make sure we get his answers as well. And women, I'd love to hear if there's anything that you learned from this podcast. If there's a new perspective that you've gained, please drop it down in the comments. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, head over to the blog, theremoteyogi.blog, to get more information on Jeremy and see everything else we've got going on. Each Friday, I put out a different maybe interview, yoga video, meditation, lots of goodies, so make sure to subscribe and turn on those notifications. We'll see you guys next week.